so much about the Giants, even on a bye week, about the GM. And as I talk about Jaxson Dart, and as I talk about the New York Giants and the idea of the next head coach and the idea of building something with Dart the rest of the way here, and we look back at that game last week and Dart's on Monday night, really, and Dart's kind of body language, everything about that game, his inability to protect himself, getting hit on the sidelines, his body language and the way he was answering the questions in the postgame and fed up with the storylines and everything else. And then we had to watch Joe Schoen have another miserable press conference and everything. What we saw yesterday, again, right? Again, this is why, in my opinion, Joe Schoen is going nowhere. And I understand, and I was listening today to the afternoon show, and they had Connor Hughes on, and they're talking about the idea that, when the Giants put out the press release that Joe Schoen was staying and there's a young core of this team that they believe in, and they believe in Joe Schoen and he's leading the coaching search, that they didn't see it falling apart from there. I mean, that is hard to believe. The idea that the Giants put that comment out there about Joe Schoen and how they still view him as the leader of this team and still view him as someone who can take this team and pick the head coach and draft next year and take a high draft pick and still build this roster after having it be a joke for the last 3 years. That they viewed some sort of turnaround with the firing of Brian Daboll tells you all you need to know about the Giants in general. Like, if anybody thought, and I know Brian Daboll was a bad head coach who the fan base couldn't despise, if you really thought Mike Kafka was going to step in and suddenly change the New York Giants from losers to winners, and a team that Brian Daboll had up 19-0 against the Broncos and winning games against the Dallas Cowboys until they didn't, and up in multiple games, the Chicago Bear game. Like, if you thought he was going to step in and suddenly transform this team, that it would be more palatable to keep Joe Schoen at the end, I just don't buy it. I don't buy that suddenly what happens the rest of the way, as ugly as Monday night was, is somehow going to change their opinion on Joe Schoen. And then you hear in that press conference about how, when asked if they thought a major head coach would impact whether or not Joe Schoen would be back, or that Joe Schoen being there would impact a big-time head coach willing to take the job. And I'm going to scream and yell, and we'll get more into Mike Tomlin and maybe some of the stuff that Ben Roethlisberger had to say. And I will pound the table for Mike Tomlin, and Bill Belichick has obviously been thrown in. But one of the bigger names associated with this job has been Mike McCarthy, the former Dallas Cowboy coach, the former Green Bay Packer coach, Super Bowl champion, proven winner, sustained winning, hardly any losing seasons. A guy who's been there, done that, multiple teams, multiple winning seasons. He's one of the bigger names that you could bring in here, and with experience and the adult in the room, which is a turn of phrase I've heard a million times over the last 3 weeks. And he went on Pat McAfee and completely just went, talked about how great Jaxson Dart is and his playmaking ability is elite. And he's got a potential to be a great player. And you could just see it. You could just see it. You can feel it. This is going to be. And I even had my concerns when they decided to keep Joe Schoen and talked about the idea of what major head coach would want to come here and work with Joe Schoen. What big-time head coach that has experience, that has won before, that might have a pick of his choice heading into this offseason with a lot of firings probably underway and a lot of openings to be there. And yet, the closer we get to it, and the more I watch this young quarterback, and the more I look at the amount of talent that this team does have, if you are a Mike McCarthy, if you are a Mike Tomlin who doesn't want to take time away, right? Say it does fall apart in Pittsburgh and he wants to get right back into it because he doesn't want a year off. He doesn't want to take time. Maybe he wants to get right back into it. Mike McCarthy looking for probably what will be his final job if it doesn't work. Bill Belichick clearly would be his final job if it doesn't work. These opportunities don't come around very often. And if they're looking to get back into the coaching cycle, if they're looking to get back into the NFL, this is the year to get back in. And there's not a lot of options that are going to be better than the New York Giants and this young quarterback. And so the reports from Jordan Renan earlier in the week or earlier in the season that he's safe unless a coach makes it clear that they don't want to work with Joe Schoen. And now we're hearing, well, if the things fall apart, and I'm sorry. I think this job is going to be so enticing. And just to hear Mike McCarthy wax poetic about this young quarterback, Joe Schoen's going nowhere, and they're going to be able to hire any of the elite head coaches that are available. John Gruden's not going to say no because Joe Schoen's there. Mike McCarthy is not going to turn away the opportunity to coach Jaxson Dart because Joe Schoen's there. Like, I thought maybe that would be the case. I don't any longer. This team, outside of Monday night, has been extremely competitive. They're going to have Malik Nabers coming back, Cam Scatterboo, Andrew Thomas. Like, I think any coach would think they could fix Abdul Carter when you find out the idea is the problem is he's sleeping through meetings and missing things. Like, I think they view this team as the clear-cut best NFL job that's going to be open this offseason. And Joe Schoen told you as much when he said, you should see how I can't keep my phone from stopping ringing. Like, we're going to have no problem filling this position. He's going nowhere. This job is going, they are going to have their choice of big head coaches who want to come here. And as ugly as it's been, I don't know if no matter how ugly it gets, the next 4 weeks, they're going to look at Joe Schoen and say, well, he's the reason. If you haven't seen that already, what could possibly happen? What could possibly happen? We have seen this before. When you fire a head coach, it could go one of two ways. You could get the boost because the team turned him off or whatever the case may be. It was time to move on. The interim head coach gets a little bit more out of them and you see a bit of a rise, or you let go of the rope. And for 2 weeks, they hung in there, played competitive games, had leads in Detroit, had lead against Green Bay. They still found ways to lose, and it felt like Monday night against the Patriots, even with the return of the young quarterback, they let go of the rope. So where do we think the Giants go from here? How much better do we expect the Giants to be? And do we honestly think that you're going to get some sort of more fair assessment of this general manager with what happens the rest of the way when you've already fired the coach, when they've already lost 11 games, when the talk isn't about the competitive nature on the field or even the game on the field? The talk is about your stud, or should be stud, third overall pick sleeping in meetings, your quarterback taking hits. Like, that's the story. The story isn't even the Giants got their ass kicked. That's the third or fourth story of Monday night. Like, what do we expect from this team moving forward? And I'm telling you, when I hear Mike McCarthy and I think of what's going on in Pittsburgh and how they're clamoring for him to be fired, and even his former quarterback, who he won a Super Bowl with, is out there talking about that Mike Tomlin should go coach Penn State. Like, that's the state of what's going on with Mike Tomlin. This is what Mike McCarthy is out there preaching his case to get this job for. Bill Belichick probably would take any job inside the NFL. Like, I don't see any longer Joe Schoen being an issue for any of these head coaches. And if that's not going to be the case, what the hell is going to change in the next few weeks that's going to make me think that John Mara or anybody else in that organization who didn't have the appetite to fire him when they fired Brian Daboll is suddenly going to do this overhaul and, take a step back and look at what's happened all year and reevaluate everything and suddenly now go, well, it really was bad the last 3 weeks. It's been bad the last 3 years. It's been bad the last 3 years. 888-808-1019. So a little bit of a football Friday. We could talk about the Thursday night game, the Dallas Cowboys, and ruining their chances of making it to the postseason. The big game's coming up this week. We'll get into it. Obviously, there's more There's more compelling games. Indianapolis and Jacksonville is obviously a big game for that division. We've talked about Philadelphia. That's a big game. Pittsburgh, Baltimore, as we talk about Mike Tomlin be rooting heavily for Baltimore in that case. I want Pittsburgh to just absolutely collapse. You've got Chicago, Green Bay, Houston, Kansas City, Philadelphia, Chargers, a lot of big games. Last week was a tough schedule. This week there are a lot of compelling games with playoff races, and it started last night, and the Lions took a step towards the playoffs, and the Cowboys and that magical run seems to be at its end unless Philadelphia is really about to just fall through the table here and have one of those years they had 2 years ago where by the end of the year they were the worst team in football, or at least one of them. 888-808-1019. We'll talk about Joe Schoen and how I think he's staying. We'll get to the Jets against the Dolphins. And, of course, we will get to some baseball. As I touched on it briefly yesterday, but the more I've been thinking about Yankees hot stove and the depressing nature of what's going on, I'm doing a turnaround. There's no way Hal's not spending. 888-808-1019. McMonagle here with you on the Fan. Quick break. We'll come back with your calls next.